So, hello everyone, and welcome to NJ Asia Live. Today we are excited to host a very special guest, Rainer Hanekamp, Angular expert, trainer, and one of the most respected voices in the modern Angular architect and the testing. In this session, we will explore modern testing with Vitest in Angular as Angular evolves in 2026 with standalone APIs, signals, improved reactivity, and a faster tooling. Our testing strategy must evolve too. Y-test is becoming a powerful alternative to Karma and adjustment, offering a faster execution, better developer experience, and modern tooling built on a white. In this talk, Rainer will help us to understand why whitest matter for Angular developers today, how to integrate it into modern Angular project, the best practices for testing components, services, and the signals, and how it improves performance and the developer experience. Let's dive into modern Angular testing. Rainer, you can start.
Yes, so hello, and also thanks for this wonderful introduction. Um, so maybe I'll start with sharing my slides, and yeah, I think I'm ready. Okay, good. So then also from my side, hello, welcome, and thanks for joining. As Elias already said, this is going to be about modern testing in Angular. And quick introduction. I mean, Elias said already everything. So I'm Rainer coming from Austria for Angular architects, provide workshops, consulting, and I'm kind of also very active when it comes to open source development. When I decided to kind of focus on 3 points for this talk, for this video, and that should really kind of highlight the reasons why you should go with Vitest. The first, and I would also say the one when someone would ask me, I would say, yes, this is the main reason, is the so-called full browser mode. So this will be the first part. The second one will be about analog, which, as I like to say it, it's kind of a necessity when you want to use Vitest nowadays. I will also explain why later. And then at the end, maybe also a little bit about the asynchronous tasks, the way how we can manage it, the way how it differs from the way how we would have done it in the old testing frameworks like wait for async, fake async, and that stuff. And that should then be it more or less. Then I hope that I have everyone persuaded to go with Vitest. Good, then I would say let's start with the full browser mode. So what is the full browser mode? If you are thinking about Vitest as a normal testing framework, like it is with Jasmine or as it is with Jest, then we know that we have these common APIs. So we have these commands where we can define certain tests, we can assert something, and then very often when it comes to those kind of component tests, then we very often also want to kind of directly talk to the DOM itself. So when I test a component, then I don't want to instantiate the TypeScript class of the component, but I really want to say somewhere there is a button, somewhere there is something which is rendered, and I want to really communicate in my test via the DOM with my component. And in the old days, we have been using maybe the debug element from the fixture that allowed you to query certain things. Then there are also some other tools on top of it, like Spectator or testing library, that helped us. But what the browser mode does, it's doing something quite differently. Because the browser mode says when it comes to DOM communication, and that is querying DOM elements, but also running actions on the DOM elements, then I'm not going to use something which I've built in the testing framework, but I'm going just to delegate those commands on an end-to-end framework, which could be Playwright. This is the one that we use by default, but also, for example, WebDriver IO. So whenever we use then certain commands in Vitest that kind of are part of this full browser mode, then Vitest says, okay, the user wants to select a certain DOM element. You know what? There is a running version of this test in the browser. I'm going to delegate it to Playwright in this case and tell Playwright, look, you are much, much better in these things like communicating with the browser. This is the intention of the user. He wants or she wants to select a certain DOM element. Do that for me. And the same also then applies when it comes to actions, which means we can really leverage everything, the power, or also the stability that those kind of end-to-end frameworks are providing for us on a much, much lower level, like for example, on component and or integration tests. So this is the browser mode. And I've also prepared an example. So maybe quickly go over maybe the basic commands before we dive into the example. So these are the main commands, or the main objects. So we have the so-called page there, where you see here we are importing it from vitest/browser. So that's an additional package which is necessary for querying the DOM. And for interacting with it, we have the user event, which is also coming from Vitest browser. User events is a term which also existed already in the testing library, but here in Vitest, it is really meant to be again, to delegate it to the end-to-end framework. And then we also have an enhanced matcher or an assertion or however you want to call it. So whenever you have an expect, you don't kind of pass it a DOM element, but you have now an expect element where you tell the assertion that this is a certain query that you want to have. And then again, Playwright will look for this feed for this DOM element. It would wait for it to kind of be rendered. And then the assertion does whatever you have instructed it to do. So actually, it's very simple. I would say it's the page, it's the user event, and it's the expect element. And it covers more or less the complete DOM interaction. Let's take a look at it. So I'm going to in my IntelliJ version, and in this case, I'm already running here on Angular 21. And what I have been doing is that for now, I have installed the Angular CLI integration of Vitest. So that means if I'm opening my Angular JSON and if I'm scrolling down to test, then you see here we are using from Angular the builder for unit tests. And as I said, this is now Vitest from 21. It's the default setting. There is also here browser, because as I said, we want to use this full browser mode. And I also want to see something. That's why I say here Chromium. If I don't want to see something, but this browser should still be used, then I would say here it's Chromium headless or something. When it comes to my tests, we have here our quiz page. So that's the one that I use for most of my example latest. Let me quickly scroll down. And I already have here an existing test. This test is written in the old style. This is not a modern test. But before we go through, let me quickly show you what the application is actually supposed to do. So I'm going to run here, going to start Angular, and then I will close it because I don't want to have a running task. And yeah, I mean, if it doesn't work, then I can also tell you. Server-side rendering works good. So we click here on holidays, and then I have here somewhere, I do have here certain quizzes, for example. So it's a normal quiz with a timeout. We have here incorrect and correct. So there is a status message. Please remember that one because that is really important. And then each quiz works with has certain questions with multiple choice answers. And if I click on the wrong one, then it says here incorrect has been answered wrongly. And I mean, in this case, there is no way out of me anymore. There is just one thing. And yeah, if it's the correct one, it would turn green. And here we have correct one. So that's the idea. That's the way how this quiz works. And this is the one that I also want to test. From an implementation perspective, the quiz consists of multiple components, services playing together I don't want to go into the testing strategies here, but I think what I should maybe mention is that I'm testing the complete feature as a whole, which means I do have here a quiz page which contains the necessary template, but also logic. So we're using here a quiz store, which is responsible for loading things and then also calculating the status. This is what the quiz page here is orchestrating, the communication with the quiz store. And then I also have here in my DOM the quiz store or the quiz page in this case is only kind of delegating the show of the questions, but also of the status to dedicated UI components, which we have here. So we have here a quiz question view, which renders the questions based on if they have been answered or not. And then we also have here a quiz status, which shows the correct and the incorrect part. And I want to test everything together. So I'm not going to do here some kind of shallow mocking or maybe mock the complete quiz store out of the way. I want to include the quiz store here as well, together with the UI components, because otherwise I can't really test if this feature works. The only thing which is being mocked is the communication with the backend. So my quiz store at some point in time has to go to the backend and needs to say, look, the user has just selected India or maybe some other country or some other holiday. And I want to know what kind of quiz we have for that particular country. This is mocked by using here the mocked version of the quiz service. And as you see here, the way how it works is that I'm saying we have a quiz service, and when find by ID is called here, then this quiz service returns a resource, and this resource works with a predefined quiz entity or quiz model. The quiz model that I'm using for my test consists of two questions. We have here an Angular quiz. The first question is the important one because this is what the test is going to target. It says in which program language was Angular written in, and answer is of course TypeScript. And this is then also what my users will more or less see. That one would be already be incorrect because the default testing framework is nowadays Vitest. So let's take a look how the basic test works. We have here a setup function. So I'm not going to use it before each, which means my tests have to call the setup function explicitly. We are overwriting here the quiz service. We are over providing it, so to say, so that not the real one is used. And we are trying to, as I said, this is a feature test. So we are trying to stay as close to the real environment as possible. We are entering our quiz page via the routing system. This is why we also have here a provide router in our testing module. I'm registering or I'm assigning the quiz page to the path quiz ID, which means we have here a dynamic property or input binding. I'm also enabling that one. And here you have then just the mocking of the quiz service. This is how we start. We also then see here, after we called the setup function, we are really trying to use the router testing harness. It's not so important what it does, but it's more important that actually at the end, if we see a router testing harness create, we are kind of telling the Angular framework, behave in the same way as you would also behave if a user would directly navigate to the quiz number one path. Which means if there are certain, maybe not guards, but if the activated route service is used, or if the router service is used, or router link, or something else, all these features would just work normally. I don't have to care about mocking it. It just works. Yo. And once we have done this, then we have what this is now modern kind of Angular testing before the Vitest area, where we have to say, I want to wait until the application has reached a state where it's stable. So that means it is now expecting user inputs. The rendering has been done and the framework doesn't have to do any work anymore. This is what await fixture when stable is doing. And then I'm starting here in the old way to communicate with my DOM. So I'm using here document query selector all. That's a DOM-based API. I could also use fixture debug element query all, which is much more complicated, but I didn't want to overdo it. And I am, as you see here, I'm using here the data test ID selectors. So I say I want to select the quiz, and I also want to select then its child elements, which has the data test ID question. And at the end, I would expect, because the application should already have been fully loaded, I would expect that the questions have a length of 2. I have 2 questions in this quiz, and this is what I'm verifying here. And then I am selecting the first question, which is the one in which programming language was Angular written in. Then I'm using here a filter based on a query that searches me for all the buttons which are shown. And I say I want to have that DOM element that contains the label TypeScript. And this is the one that I also want to click on. And then I say again, okay, and now maybe the Angular framework needs to do a few things. I'll give it the time it requires. There is a certain processing going on of my answer. If it's correct or incorrect, then probably the DOM also needs to update or needs to be synchronized, to use the modern terminology. And after that, we are reaching already the end of our test, where I say, I don't really want to look into the class of my component, because I know that if an answer is answered correctly, that in the DOM there is a correct label. This is just the state coming from the status. That one should say it has a text content with correct one, and there is also an incorrect label which should say there is an incorrect 0. This is what I would expect. And this is, again, this test runs. This test is also successful. For some reason, it won't be that easy with Vitest just to trigger it via your IDE. We will come to that later. But what I can do is that I can go into my terminal and I can say here pm ng test. And if I run that, then Vitest will now use the full browser mode, which doesn't give it any benefit at the moment. But you see, the browser is started like it was in Jasmine, and in that browser, all the unit tests are executed. So the test code that I've written together, of course, also with the application, is now running directly here in the browser. That's the point, which means all the things which the application requires, the real browser environment here is executed. So all the asynchronous tasks, there is nothing to kind of emulate or simulate what chess had to do in the old days, because it was always running on Node.js. That all doesn't apply here. It's the full browser. Everything's available. So, and now I want to make use of this full browser mode, which makes a lot of things much easier for me. So I have here a new test, and maybe IntelliJ should not try to tell me what kind of things I should type, because otherwise I can't explain it. So I would go here, and I, in a way, would start exactly in the same way as I have done it with my other tests. So we find ourselves here where Angular would say, I have done the communication. Maybe there are a few things that I have to do. This is then where in the old days we had to call the fixture when stable. But with the brand new features, that is not really possible. Looking at the time, I think we can allow it, or I think it's possible that we maybe don't directly jump into the full browser mode, that we also maybe take a look at the testing library, which I would say is like an intermediate step towards the full browser mode. And maybe some of the viewers might have been using the testing library so that they also feel a little bit more familiar. A testing library in the end means that we have a very guided way on how to write our component tests. And again, it really tries us to force to always go via the DOM. And in the testing library, whenever we want to select certain things, then we have here the screen command. The screen command needs to be imported. So where are my imports? Here they are. So I would say here, import screen from testing library Angular. Yes, it's the correct one. And with that screen, I could now use, for example, a find by test ID, which in the end would me to do the same thing that I've done before, namely what document query selector is doing, selecting elements via the data test ID. But there is now also an alternative approach, namely that the testing library says, look, I can also help you. You can also query for DOM elements via their accessibility role, which very often is assigned automatically by the browser. So you don't have to come up with an own data test ID if you use the role. And in our case, of course, sometimes the application needs to be a little bit prepared for accessibility, but in our case, it works. Because if I want to access the questions, then I can say find all by role. And the role of a question, like of this div block, is actually, let me quickly check, it's group. So the screen should actually now find two questions. And the way how the testing library is designed is that it says, I am going again, give the application a certain time that it requires to render those groups. And that's why always with screen, we have an await command. So I would then say here, the two DOM elements, hopefully the questions, they are coming out of this screen find by role. And you see here, I don't really have to tell the Angular framework, or I don't have to say, I need to wait now. I need to call when stable because the Angular framework needs to do certain things. I say, actually, I don't care. I just want to await until this group is shown, and that's it. Don't want to think about, is not the Angular framework doing something? Is the Angular framework waiting for me to do something? I just don't care. And then I could actually come up here with my first assertion. Okay, since here it's questions, that's an array. So I can say here, I want to see number 2. I save it. The tests are now re-executed, and we see we already have our first error. Wonderful. Why is this happening? Screen testing library. That should not happen. Maybe we'll do the shortcut, or maybe we rerun ng test again. Strange error. Yeah. Error's gone. Good. But it was something maybe else. So turn it off, turn it on again also works on Mac OS these days. Good. Yeah, so we see we have the two questions. And then the next thing for me would be that I'm going to find that I'm taking the first question. And I would say in the first question, there is somewhere a button. So there is a role button somewhere which has the name TypeScript. And I want to click on that. So the way how I do this is that I say, we have my first question here, it's question 0. And then I can say, and this is from the naming, that's a good function within like this, within testing library Angular, within the first question, I want to find something by a role that something has the role button and it has the name TypeScript. So that again will return me an asynchronous task. So I need to await it. I could say here, that's the button. Then I could also say, I want to click on the button, which is the way how we would have done it in the past days. But with modern testing, we do not click on a DOM element because there is a little bit of a difference. We want to stay as close to the user as possible. So that means my users don't really call a method on a DOM element. They click on something via the browser. And in our case, the testing library says, I can help you with that. I'm not like a playwright that comes later, which can really do the full click, but I can at least simulate or emulate a click, how it would have been done if there would a browser. So I'm trying to be as close as possible to the real environment. And the testing library next to the screen is also now exposing a user event. That's another import that I have to do. So it's here user event. And it says this is coming from the testing library Angular slash no, testing library user event. Yo, and instead of clicking on the button, we would then say, I'm going to await user event click button, and the click will then be simulated as close as possible to the real behavior by the testing library. And for us, the only thing which is then necessary to do, we see it already here. So I'm going to use here tab complete. The only thing that we need to do is that we say we are looking now for a certain text where we say it should have the answer correct one. We can also be maybe a little bit more precise. We say not somewhere in the DOM, but there is a certain um, DOM element that needs to show that. So I can then say here find by test ID, and the test ID for that is correct. So that is the test ID that I have provided. And then I can say here the correct label that we have should have a text content. You see here also that's it's a new assertion here as well. Correct is 0. And this is what I would expect. So if I run this test now, then I hope it's not going to crash again. It does. Um, Something's weird, but yeah, it worked. It worked with turn it off and on again. So I hope it also works now. Wonderful. So now you see that the test is actually running. If I would say it's correct 0, then of course I would expect it to fail. But in the end, the idea here is that this testing library, as an external library, is like it tries of says, look, you can also run me in Node.js, but I will do my best to kind of simulate a real behavior which is done if you would use it via the browser. And this full browser mode that we have now takes it to the extreme because it says, why do we actually play games? Why do we simulate? Why do we emulate some things? We have a running browser. We have an end-to-end framework which can do exactly a user behavior. We don't need to simulate it anymore. So let's do it for real. And this means now that I'm not going to use the testing library commands anymore, but I'm not going to use those kind of objects that I've shown you before in my slide. So if I want to select something, then I'm using the page object. If I want to do certain actions, I'm going to use the user event, but from Vitest browser, not from the testing library. And when I want to assert something, I'm going to use an expect element. And what Vitest does again, it will internally use Playwright. It will delegate those queries, those actions to Playwright. And Playwright does it in the same way as it would do with a normal end-to-end test. That's the idea. So how does this work? I mentioned already, we have here a page. So I can say page and the page object. Let me quickly go to the top. The page comes here from the imports. So I can now say, so those of you who are using Playwright might already be familiar with this page. The page is like an object that helps me to define the, the rules or the specification for the query. It doesn't execute the query yet. It's just definition on what DOM element should be or on to which kind of selector rules should Playwright use when it searches for the DOM element. I would say we have here an API which allows us to do this a little bit better than we have it done with the testing library. I don't have to first of all find the questions via the group and then take the first question and then maybe go on. I can very easily do it like I would do it as a normal user. I can say, look, somewhere there's a question with the name in which programming language was Angular written in that question, and I can do this in one command in that question. There is an answer, there is a button that says TypeScript, and this is the button that I want to have. So the way how it works is that I can say here get by role. This is not something new. We have also here find all by role. I think get by role. Yes, sorry. Get by role. Then I say, what did I do wrong? So get by role. Then I can say I will find now two questions, if you remember, but I don't want two. I want to have that one that has a certain text. And this is available. So I can say it has a certain text, and if I want, I can copy the complete name of the question or the complete question here in this parameter. So I would scroll to the top and I would say, here we have our data. This is the question that I want to answer. In which programming language was Angular created? So I'm going to put it here. And so I would now hope that I have only selected one question. And then I would say, if we are on the right question, then the next would be the button that has the name TypeScript. This is the one. And instead of doing here a console log that doesn't make any sense, I'm going to click on it. And the way how I can click on it is by using again my user event. So that means I need to go again to the imports because I have now two user events, and I'm going to remove the one from the testing library. And I'm going to re-enable the one from Vitest browser, as you see here. Going back. Good. So this is something I don't need anymore. The button is something we also have already. So you see even the testing library has already shortened the amount of code quite significantly. But with the full browser mode, it even gets smaller. And I could now say, look, user event, we have it already. You click on that particular button that the page here is returning you. And you need to await this because again, the user event or Playwright in this case, to be precise, is now doing the click, and Playwright says everything that you want me to do needs to be asynchronous. So that's why we have here the await. We don't have the await here because we never, or page never, does the querying for the DOM. It's just the information what should happen. The querying happens with the click. That's also something which is useful because if we have a DOM element, if we have a reference to a DOM element in our test, which we want to reuse later, and Angular is re-rendering it again, then the DOM reference is lost and we have a different one, and we are confused why the test is not working. And then here again, we are saying, okay, there is a correct label. We can also shorten this a little bit. So I can say we have a page, get by test ID if I want to. I would say correct. I can remove the selector, which we had before. And then the main difference now is that I can't say expect page get by test ID because that would not do anything. But I have to use the expect element. Expect element will trigger this querying together with the waiting feature. Everything's built in, and it will wait if Angular needs to do something that this DOM element is rendered. And because this could take some time, that one needs to become an await as well. And this is now the same test, but not with the testing library, but now with the full browser mode that Vitest provides. So if I now go back, this test is really kind of running here. What we don't see here is that somewhere else, Playwright is also running and it's communicating with this DOM that we have right here. And it's much shorter, as you see, and it's, in my opinion, much easier to read, to understand. It comes with, and it kind of really reduces a lot of things that we had to think about in the old days, like when stable, not even saying detect changes or dispatching custom events, because if I say input values equals something, it doesn't happen automatically. Good. That's the full browser mode. I'm going to stop my terminal here. And I would then move on to the next part, which is going to be a little bit shorter, but also very important, which is about analog.js. And for that, I'm going to move to cursor. So here we are. Let's stay right here. Let me quickly zoom in. And the problem that we have right now, and it also applies to VS Code and whatever you have. The problem here is that it kind of detects my Vitest tests. And I can even click on them. So if I have here my quiz page spec and I say run it with the official Vitest extension, then we see that immediately fails with a very strange error message. It says the injectable platform location needs to be compiled, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So there are some problems where it doesn't really work with the official or anything which kind of is made for Vitest. The reason why we have this situation is that the normal way, the default mode in which Vitest is operating in is based that Vite is also part of the game. So kind of Vitest kind of expects that Vite is running, Vite is doing the compilation, the framework specific compilation of our components, and then kind of can start its execution based on it. So Vitest runs on top of Vite. But this is not the way how it is in Angular. In Angular, the build is not done by Vite, the build is done by the Angular CLI itself, which means there might be certain requirements, certain requirements that all the tools have that want to work with Vitest. Like they say, it's just Vite, just run Vite, and then it just works out of the box. And Vite has a certain configuration for the test and all of that, and then it just works. Not so here, because Vite is completely eliminated and Angular takes over. That's also why we have to explicitly run ng test, for example, because the Angular builder or the Angular CLI itself needs to start Vitest. What analog.js is doing is that it says, look, I can, if you want, I can provide an Angular plugin, which I can plug in into Vitest, which means the way how Vitest runs is exactly the default way how it runs for React, how it runs for Vue, how it also runs as the authors are expecting it. And so Vite would then do the compilation of the Angular components, and Vitest would then run based on that. And everything that you will then find in the official documentation of Vitest, all the things that have been answered on Stack Overflow or that your AI agent might tell you will work because they have been all trained that Vitest works on top of Vite. And the same is also true for all the extensions like the VS Code extension. That is the important part. And that's why I really would recommend that you go with analog. And I have already prepared a branch for that. So let me quickly revert all of this. So I have here Vitest init 1, which in a way shows my quiz store spec TS. Yeah, there we are. No, this is the wrong one. I also have to rerun pm install because otherwise it doesn't work. Good. There we are. Quiz spec here. I'm going to copy the old one over here. We have just one test. Paste it in here. Sorry for switching between IntelliJ and okay. Good, good. Yo, so we have now what I have done now is that I have now really kind of replaced my complete configuration with analog. I didn't want to do this manually because there are several steps which are included, but we can quickly go through it. So it's the same test that we had before, but now we all of a sudden have here a, ah, Elias, can I quickly, someone's really is ringing on the door. Can I quickly
Yeah,
go
yeah,
out?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good,
Yes,
good.
yes.
Just a minute.
Okay, we have three questions from our subscribers. So in quiz session, we will ask about it. If you have a question, you can join us. Write, leave comment on the chat. We'll write. We'll discuss about it. Okay. Okay.
I am sorry, but at
No
least it
problem.
proves that this is live.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So where were we? I said I've now switched my branch to the analog version. And you see here that now all of a sudden we have a Vite config. And that's the real one. That's also the one that you find in the configuration or in the documentation of Vitest. And that means that all the features that the Vitest configuration provides are available. No kind of compromise. Everything is there. You see here, for example, that I have enabled here a test timeout so that I can easily control if kind of the browser mode takes a little bit longer. The way how I enable, the way how I configure my browser is also not done via the Angular CLI, via Angular JSON, but it's done here as it is documented again on Vitest. I think I can't highlight this enough that this is always the official approach, the official following the official documentation of Vitest. We also have here certain things which we probably don't have in the Angular CLI, not just probably, but we just don't have it. And that's here the trace mode. Trace mode means that we are instructing Playwright if a certain test fails, that it keeps the trace data. And this tracing data can then also be represented with a certain trace viewer, which allows us to analyze why a test has actually failed. And this analysis or this analysis, this analyzation analysis can also happen when the test was running in the CI, it failed, and we don't know what actually has happened. And coming back to the original problem, if I go here to my extensions and if I load them, then again, it's still there. But now, if I click here on run it, then this error that we had before now goes away because the official Vitest extension sees that this is an official, a default Vitest configuration, and everything just works. That's the point. I can also use here debugging mode. So I can even set here a breakpoint where I say, you stop right here. I want to see what's going on. That also works. But maybe what is even more powerful is this trace mode that I want to show you. So if I, for example, go now into my Playwright con, into my quiz spec, where do we have it? Here. And for some reason, I would say it's not correct one, but it's correct two, something like this. Then again, I can say, okay, please rerun it. We see the test takes some time, but then it fails after 5 seconds. By the way, this timeout is something which was really an issue for me when I was using the official Angular when Angular CLI was responsible to do the build, because I didn't find the right configuration property where I can lower the timeout. Usually it's 30 seconds. And if you're writing tests, then you very often have tests that just fail and you don't want to wait half a minute for it. So this is already this was already a first big improvement for me. But now comes the trace mode. You see here, it says, yeah, the test has failed, but you can use this tracing file that I've prepared for you. And you now have to imagine that this test now maybe runs in the CI environment. It maybe runs overnight or maybe not. Doesn't matter, but it just failed. And we want to know exactly why did it fail. Now I can make use of this tracer. So I'm going to copy it. And since the trace view is something that comes from Playwright, I can just use my normal Playwright installation. I can say here show trace, and I'm just pasting my tracing file. And if I click on enter, then hopefully something happens. Yes, you see it right here. This is the rendering or the representation of our component test. So we see here, for example, the first step, the Angular or the quiz page, the way how it looked like when it was rendered. We see here the questions that we were expecting. We see here also when we clicked on the button TypeScript, where it was clicked on. And then we see that for some reason, it just failed. And the trace view gives me information of about 5 seconds, which means I can very easily hover with my mouse over the timeline and I see how my component has changed over time. In my case, I think it's now easy because I see there is a correct one. I was hoping that it's actually correct two, which is not the case. But now I understand why that happened and can now fix my test or fix the code if that one had contained the bug. This trace view also comes with further things. So for example, we see rolled network request, which probably might not be that important when it comes to component tests because we usually mock it. But still, it's nice that we know that it's there. And we also have something like a locator. So I can very easily say, I'm not sure what kind of element I want to select. Then I can click here, or you can also click here maybe on the TypeScript button or on the correct, because that's the one that we are actually looking for. And then it says, look, if you're using as like a page get by text and you use correct one, then you would find that particular DOM element. So a lot of information and even more is included in the trace view, and this is something you get for free just by using analog. You also don't have a login effect. I also think that this is also something which is very important because you are writing Vitest tests, either if you're using analog or if you're using the Angular CLI. It's the same commands. The difference is that during the runtime, during execution, you have more options. But if you at some point in time decide to go back from analog back to the Angular CLI, then your tests stay as they are. You don't have to touch them. Yeah, maybe quickly look on the Angular JSON. So of course, here the test also had to be changed. We're not using the builder anymore from Angular, but now we're using here analog Vitest Angular test. So analog only in this case jumps in when I'm running the tests. But when I, for example, do linting, the build or the serve, then it's still the old Angular CLI, if that is important to you. Yeah. So again, analog, use it. You will definitely be very happy about it. Here's a list of different things, but as I said, it starts very quickly that you want to use analog. As soon as something doesn't work, or as soon as as you look out for a certain configuration property you don't know, the Vitest documentation will point you to a certain property which will not work in Angular. You are confused, you don't know what's going on. Confusion becomes frustration, and with analog, you don't have all these issues. And then the last chapter is then also handling asynchronous tasks, because this is also going to change. To make it short, fake async, wait for async, they don't work anymore, because the Angular CLI version of it doesn't really patch Vitest. So that means it just doesn't work. One could now also say, yeah, but this is fine because the modern way on how to write Angular applications is without Zone.js, which means in that way also these two functions wouldn't work anymore. Yes, but some of us might have an old application, might not have been able to migrate, and still might have old tests that use these things. So there are two options. You're either going to rewrite your old tests, you move away from wait for async or fake async, and you move towards the built-in fake timers. So Vitest has certain faking functionality, mocking functionality of the time available. Not going to show them now because this again would take maybe half an hour, maybe even longer. The other approach is that you use again analog. Because guess what? With analog, if you have a Zone.js application, it is able to patch the Vitest API, and you can also use fake async, wait for async together with Vitest. But that's an analog exclusively feature. But it's really great. What I want to do here is that I want to quickly only show you the polling mechanism, because I think very often you don't even have to use fake timers. Very often, it's just that you are in a situation where, say, some asynchronous task is now running. And in some sense, I want to do this. I want to do the same thing that I could with my components, where I can tell Playwright, look, something is going to happen in the future within an asynchronous task. I don't know when, but at some point, hopefully very soon, the DOM element will appear. So just wait for it. And this is exactly what expect poll is also doing. It just says there is something which will happen very soon after one or multiple asynchronous tasks have been executed. I don't care how many asynchronous tasks. I don't care if they are macro tasks. I don't even need to know what this actually is. I just say this is going to happen in the future. And I don't also need to mock or fake times or anything. It's just pure native execution. The example that I've prepared is my quiz store spec. And in this case, of course, it's a classic unit test, I would say, because if I'm testing a component and I'm dealing with asynchronous tasks, then I can use my expect element or my page. They will take care of it. But now I'm in a non-component level. I'm in a service that I want to test. And of course, those DOM-based helpers are not available. I can't use here the page. I cannot use the expect element anymore because there is no DOM. Here I have a quiz store. So the quiz store is the service, is this logic, which manages the logic for my quiz, obviously. And what I want to test is if the loading works. The quiz store is using the quiz service to load the data for the quiz. We have seen the quiz service already before, and I'm doing here a very similar approach. I'm saying the quiz store, although it uses the quiz service, but I'm going to mock the quiz service. I'm going to say the quiz service is returning a resource which contains a promise. And when I set the ID, it kind of has a promise which resolves to the same quiz that we have seen before. So here again, we have here this Angular quiz and with these questions. So, and we see already the solution. I quickly had to remove it. This is the test. So I say here, I'm going to instantiate my quiz store. That one is not so important, this line, what I do here, but it just generates me a resource. And then I have an Angular resource right here in front of me. So with the resource, as you probably know, there is a status message. And then at some point in time, it says in the beginning, it's idle. But now I can go to my quiz store and I can now say, look, I want to set a certain ID. And if that's happening, then the resource is triggered, because here we have the ID. The resource is triggered and returns a promise. So we have asynchronous tasks running. So I would then say here, I have my quiz store. I'm going to set the ID. There is a command, there is a method for it. I say this is the number one. And now, because expect elements not there, I could kind of say expect quiz resource status. It should not be idle anymore. So I can say here idle, and I would hope that now this test is going to fail. Because if I set the ID, the resource should immediately go into a loading status, because it's just now starting to load something. So I'm going to execute my test here. And it said it has passed. Wonderful. That's actually not what I wanted to hear, because it should actually say idle. Quiz store set ID is number one. I've stored it. Quiz resource should be loading. Very strange, very strange. Did I not save the file? Okay, it works for both. That's not even more strange, I would say. Doesn't really work like this. Ah, okay, finally. It's now finally failing. Good. So it's not idle. It is loading as it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be. So you'll never trust your own tests. Yo, and now the question is, okay, we have now an asynchronous task. How do we verify, or how do we come from a quiz resource status, which says loading, to something that says resolved, to be resolved? If I run this test, I hope it's failing. Yeah, it says here it's still loading, because what do we have in the middle? Here we have an asynchronous task. Task or tasks? Actually, we don't know. And I also don't want to know. That's the point. I don't want to know what things are now happening internally, how many asynchronous tasks are started or whatever. And in the old days, we could very easily say, okay, there is now a fake async, and I would now say tick and hope for the best. And if it doesn't work, I can also try a flush or a tick 10 just to be on the safe side. But that all required a certain mocking of internals of the time processes that run inside of the browser. And maybe I don't want that. I don't want to mock anything. Again, I want to stay as close to the real runtime as I can. So I'm not going to use yet the so-called fake timers, which is what I could do. I could trigger here certain asynchronous tasks. But I say, look, there is probably somewhere an effect running. This effect could be a set timeout, request animation frame. Again, I don't want to know what the effect is actually doing. But at some point in time, and very soon, this resolve should turn, this resource should turn into a resolved status. And this is where the expect poll becomes important. Because I can say, look, you are going to query the status of the resource until it turns to resolved. And I'm going to await it. That is the same approach that I also apply to components, to the DOM testing, where I say the framework will do whatever is necessary. It will run its internal asynchronous tasks. I am not going to interfere there. It should just do what it does. I'm just waiting for it. We probably don't have timeouts with 5 seconds. Very often, most of the time, it's just a promise which runs immediately, just runs asynchronously. But this is something we can wait for. And this is also what I'm doing here. So if I'm saving that file, the test reruns and it says, wonderful, now the quiz resource status has turned into resolved. I don't have here again a when stable, a tick, a new promise resolve with a set timeout, nothing. It's just a normal expect poll. In the end, what you see here, this expect poll is also used in our expect element. So the expect element is actually a wrapper around the expect poll where it incorporates also the communication with DOM. So this is why I would say I would really try to stay as long as I can on the expect poll if I'm doing service-based tests, so where there is no DOM included. And if I have no other choice, then I can always use the fake timers, but I will not use them by default. And the expect poll is something new. We did not have that one in Jest or in Vitest, in Jasmine. And that's everything I had to say. So
Okay.
we have
Yeah,
now
we
seen the
have
full, yeah,
here we have three questions from
please.
YouTube.
Oh, there are questions. Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
Okay. The first question from Mike. How do you migrate a large Angular project from a Karma to Vitest?
So generally speaking, for the Angular team, it was really important that the migration can happen very easily. As you might know, they're also using internally Jasmine and Karma within more than 4,000 applications at the moment. So they can't just say, look, forget them. You write all your tests again. I don't think that they would have a longer career at Google if they do this. Um,
Yeah.
so you can stay on Karma and Jasmine if you want. So they will not remove it that soon. That's one thing. You have no pressure, nothing. Um, the nice thing is, if your tests are already running in Karma and not in Jest, then your tests are running in a browser environment, which means in Vitest it's exactly the same, but the API is a little bit different. So when it comes to mocking, when it comes to the timers, when it comes to the spies, that is different. So you will definitely have to rewrite certain things. I guess you might also have a wait for async, fake async. So here the question is also, do you want to rewrite them or not? Uh, Probably have to. But in the end, what you can do and what I would do, you can leave Karma as it is, and you say those tests which should be executed with Karma, you maybe use the spec extension for them, and then you install analog. I hope that we don't have to discuss analog or not. This is given for me at the moment. Then you install analog. You can again use wait for async, fake async if you want. And you can then write those tests you want to run in Vitest with analog. You can then use as a suffix test. So instead of spec TS, you just call them test TS. And then you have both frameworks running. You don't have to make a big migration, but you can do it incrementally. This is the way how I would approach the migration for an existing larger applications. There is also a migrator available from Angular itself, but that one is experimental. So I guess again, that means that certain things won't work. But as I said, in general, just certain APIs are really different. It's not like you are replacing one command with another. There is really something, it's a different concept that you have to apply. So you have to do some manual work. But you are not pushed to do it. There is no stress, there is no pressure. But if you can also say we leave the old tests as they are, and only for the new tests we use analog and write them in Vitest. This is how I would do it.
Yeah, okay. And next question from Dilmurat. How would you structure the test in a large Angular monorepo using Vitest?
Well, if you use a mono repository, then maybe you are already using NX. Um, and in this case, NX takes over. So I don't think, to be honest, that there is any difference like to the other tests that you already have. Because you have an application, you have a library in a mono repository. Instead of now running Jest or Karma, it is now running Vitest, and that's it. So for a mono repository, I don't really think that you have to care that you have to make any changes. except switching to Vitest. And if you're using NX, then NX has already more experience with Vitest because they have been supporting analog for quite some time. Actually, analog was introduced by Younes Shady. I don't know when, last year or the 2 years ago. I think it was last year.
Yeah, okay, last question from Davron. How do you test Angular signals in the computed state with Vitest? Maybe you already answered in the presentation.
No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no, not really. So the way how I would usually see it, if I'm writing tests for a component, then I don't care if my component is using a signal to render the stuff, if it's using an observable, so the async pipe in the template, or nothing of these two. I'm only testing if something is shown. So I say, there's a button, there's a text, it needs to have this kind of message or that label or whatever. And again, whatever the application is using, it doesn't really matter, which is a good thing because you don't want to touch your test whenever you change something. And especially for signals, if you have old components which are using observables and your test did never cared about the observable because it was always testing against the DOM, and you're now replacing the observable with a signal, you don't have to touch your test. You say the test verifies that at the end this is the outcome, and you have then something which we normally don't have with unit tests. You have a test that you can use for checking if the refactoring was successful. That is really great. So in that case, when it comes to component level testing, I would not, this discussion how do I test a signal doesn't exist there. When we are going one level down to the service test, then of course it's a different story because then we have a service that we want to test. The service is exposing a signal. Then I can't say I don't care. Of course you care because you're either getting a signal back or an observable. So you need to subscribe or you need to call it. So in the end, when it comes then to signals, you just call the signal, you just call the computed within the test, within that's straightforward. The only challenge that you might have is when you're using certain things which are using an effect or the effect itself. So in this case, you need to again trigger asynchronous tasks. You can use the expect poll if you want. The testbed also has a tick, but I would really go with expect poll whenever I can, because that one will make sure that the effect is also running. I mean, it will not make sure, it will not trigger the effect, but the effect will just run automatically. And the expect poll works for the effect, but also for the resources, for example, which are also using an effect under the hood.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So we can finish maybe. Uh, yeah, that was an incredible, insightful session on modern
Thanks.
testing with Wise in Angular. And a huge thanks to you to Rainer Hanekamp for sharing his expertise, practical insights, and the forward-looking perspective on where Angular testing is heading. Today we are learned why modern tooling like YS is reshaping Angular testing, how to improve performance and developer experience, and how to future-proof our strategy in the large scale Angular application. If you enjoyed this session, like the video, share your question in the comments, and subscribe to NJ Asia for more expert level Angular content. And we will see you at the next NJ Asia Live. Thank you.
Yep. Also from my side, thanks a lot also for staying up on a weekend on Saturday to join you. And also thanks, Ilias, for organizing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.